All right, I'm gonna give you the option. Give this option to my last class for meditation. We can do our normal meditation, or has anyone ever heard of laughter yoga?
Let's do that.
Here's the deal though. My last class chose laughter yoga and then nobody participated.
What is it?
So y'all gotta do it.
What is it?
So laughter yoga is a course that they offer at Salt Lake Community College. You can get college credit for it. I think it's towards one of like their fitness credits or something like that. And the reason that it's a fitness or health credit is because laughter releases endorphins, right? But your body can't distinguish between real and fake laughter. So forcing yourself to laugh still releases the endorphins. So if we do laughter yoga today, you have to participate and do what it says. Deal? All right, on your feet. Stand on
First laughter exercise is age laughter. How would you laugh when you are in a different age group? When you are like a child, when you are a young man, and then you are an old man. Okay, let's see how a child will laugh. How would you laugh? Our next exercise is hands in your pants. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Winter car laughter. Imagine you are living in Canada, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, it's very cold, minus 40, minus 45. Imagine you have parked your car outside and it's full of snow, it's very cold. And the moment you enter the car, turn the key, all it does is, and second time, if you turn the key, it does. And third time. Next factor is long laughter. Something like long laughter. start the engine of the lawnmower by pulling the string?
I think you guys win the best award for participation on that. All right. So go ahead and do the warm up. If you need a piece of paper, there's some up here. You only need like a half a sheet. Like I said, you only need like half a sheet, so if you want to split it, share with somebody, you can. Does no one bring paper anymore?
No, it's easier to get it.
It's kind of hard to get out of here.
All right, so on the piece of paper, what does climate change mean to you? Take about 1 minute to write that down. All right, I'll give you about 30 more seconds to finish writing down your warm up. All right, looks like we're done. Based on the conversations I was listening to. All right, is there anyone who wants to share what climate change means to you?
Global warming.
Yeah, James.
You warm my heart like climate change warms the world. Roses are red, violets are blue. I increase greenhouse gases, so do you.
Okay, so James is responsible for global warming. Thank you for that, James. All right, let's see. Let's have Sam Pingree. What does climate change mean to you? I can't hear you. Okay.
Well, I like climate change is like everyone like it's not just that the world getting like warmer, it can also be like climate getting colder too.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Yes.
I think that climate change is like the general climate of the earth kind of going either up or down.
Okay, perfect. And here's a follow-up question for you. You don't need to write this one down. What do climate change and evolution have to do with each other? Yeah. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yes,
I
James.
think because of climate change, it changes the environment, and when the environment changes, the animals have to adapt to it, so there's probably a lot of animals who have already adapted or are beginning to adapt.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Chloe, right? Did you have your hand up?
Animals that have a lot of insulation, a lot of
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. That's a great example. All right, so. All right, so unit 4.4 that we're gonna study is evolution and the environment. Oh, I forgot. Let me back up. Does anyone have questions on the assessment from last time? I had 2 topics I wanted to cover with you on that before I moved on. Okay, I just wanted to focus really quick on the assessment last time. When a question asks to state evidence or support with evidence, make sure that you are clearly supporting your evidence. There's a lot of people who lost points, unfortunately, because they were just giving the prediction without evidence to back it up. So in the future, if you ever see evidence in the question, utilize evidence. The other one that I wanted to focus on is how adaptation happens. So if we focus on like the dark and the light colored moths, they don't just decide to change colors, right? How does that happen? James?
Through natural selection and adaptation, like when they have variations in their genes. Then it's easier for the owls to eat blue moths somehow, then the green moths survive, and that becomes a population.
And they pass on that trait, right? So it doesn't happen, we don't just change color spontaneously because we need to blend in. It happens because those who don't have the advantageous trait die off and the other one gets passed down. There's a lot of people on the test who were making it seem like, or how they understood it was that they just chose to change color when it was necessary to do so. So I just want to clarify that. Maybe that was my bad or something, I don't know. But I just wanted to clear that up. And then retakes as well. Retakes are happening today and tomorrow after school. If that does not work for you, then you need to come talk to me or send me a message to find a different time to do the retake. Okay, now we will go back to this that we were working on. So section or standard 4.4 evolution in the environment. This unit I'm going to do a little different than the units I've done in the past, as opposed to having like one big lecture and then the following 3 class periods are activities and an assessment. This is going to be more of a self-paced learning unit that we're going to do. So it is going to focus a lot on evidence, having you learn from the evidence and having you be able to answer and construct your responses based on evidence, kind of like we did in the last one. So instead of me lecturing, it's going to be a lot of you doing self-learning. So can somebody go ahead and read that for me? Somebody who maybe hasn't participated yet. Nobody. Let's go ahead and have Isaac read it for us.
Of some species. The emergence of these species over time or the extinction of other species emphasize the cause and effect relationship for how changes and the rate of change to the environment affects distribution or disappearance of traits in species. Examples of changing environmental conditions could include deforestation, application of fertilizers, droughts, or flood.
Perfect. Thank you, Isaac. So engage in argument from evidence. So because we have a class of 40, it becomes a little difficult to do actual like debates or arguments out loud. Just there's so many of us that it ends up being not everyone can participate. So the way I've set the unit up, and you can see this on the back whiteboard with the assignments that we're gonna have. It seems like a lot for this unit, but I promise you it's not. There's just a lot there so that you guys can build your confidence in constructing those arguments and those explanations, utilizing evidence. And like I said, this unit is all about how the environment can affect the evolution of animals. So in this example, it talks about deforestation, application of fertilizers, droughts, floods, and other natural disasters and what effect that has. So to start, so many things up here. To start, we're gonna watch this video about Yellowstone National Park. The scientist Liz Hadley has studied the park for, I believe, 30 or so years, and has studied the change that's happened as climate change has increased. So this video explains what's going on with the park, what's happened due to climate change, and it's just gonna kind of be an intro to get us going for this unit. So you don't need to take notes or anything on this one. I just want you to watch and take in the information that she talks about. And I'm gonna ask some people to share after the video.
Yellowstone National Park. Founded in 1872, it's considered to be the first national park in the world.
There's really important lessons from Yellowstone, great lessons. As the first national park, this is the place that saved some of the great mammals. But this vast, carefully managed ecosystem can't protect itself from forces outside, global forces of environmental change that are happening so quickly that their impact is being felt here by both plants and animals.
Sean Carroll is visiting Yellowstone with Liz Hadley, who has been studying the biodiversity of Yellowstone for 30 years. They're here to trace the threads that connect the plants and animals living in this park. Their first stop is a grove of white bark pine trees.
This is what a healthy tree looks like, this bark. You know, first of all, you can see this is kind of what's given it white bark, its name. This is what a healthy tree should look like. So the stand that we're in is really in good shape.
This particular tree has had a hungry visitor.
So these are bear claw marks. Well, what's it doing here? Why is it approaching this tree? Well, it's because white bark pine produce very high nutrient seeds. The bears will come here right before they go into hibernation. This is when they really pack on a lot of fat in order to overwinter. The nutrients from those seeds is directly correlated with overwinter survival of bears.
But grizzly bears cannot reach most of the pine cones because they're too high up on the trees. So they rely on a smaller animal for their snack. Red squirrels easily get up to the pine cones to eat the seeds, storing the excess in ground burrows or middens. Further down the path, they find evidence that a hungry grizzly bear dug up one of the hiding places.
All around us are middens from squirrels, and this is what the bears go after. And indeed, here is a pile of bear scat. And in the scat are seeds from white bark pine.
This is all seed.
100% seeds from white bark pine. And
Found what he was looking for.
he dug up the middens, and there they are.
These three organisms, the tree, the squirrel, the bear, represent a healthy food web. But a tiny creature is threatening the survival of all three organisms.
Okay, Sean, this tree, it's been hit by the mountain pine beetle. What happens with these? What you see, the evidence are these little holes. What happens when you see this kind of response on the part of the tree is that the beetle's gone. This tree is dead.
How old do you think this tree is?
This tree probably 700 years or so.
And
700
how long
years.
does it take the beetles once they attack to kill a tree like this?
So once they attack, this is a big attack. It's a day or two.
A day or two,
A day or two
after 700 years.
after 700 years.
The beetle has always existed in Yellowstone. It's not a foreign species. What has changed is where and for how long it survives.
The warming climate in this high elevation region is allowing beetles to move into these what were previously high elevation cold regions. And now they're high elevation, it still gets cold, but it's not cold enough to kill the beetle. So they're surviving longer and killing white rock.
So the warmer Yellowstone created an opportunity for the beetles, but the detriment.
Absolutely.
The change in climate is also affecting life lower down the mountain.
There's a pond right here. This is a pond that sometimes holds water earlier in the year. You can see it's drying out. It's almost drying out. Look over here. Look at the dust over there where the bison are moving around. That pond no longer stores water at all. You can see that's dry. Ponds are less permanent. There are fewer ponds that retain water, and there are more ponds that never get water at all.
And why is that?
So we've been getting less rainfall and temperatures have gotten warmer, even just over the last couple of decades.
What effects do the drying ponds have on the wildlife?
So the big effect that we've noticed is on the amphibians. So we've monitored amphibians for the last 20 years. And what we see is that there are fewer ponds that have amphibians. So there are fewer populations of amphibians. There's been a decline in species diversity within the ponds that have amphibians to begin with. And there are fewer populations for each species in the area.
They visit a pond where aquatic life used to be teeming.
Okay, Sean, so this is perfect amphibian habitat. See the cover around the margins of the pond, see, cover for birds and for salamanders and frogs.
I don't hear the frogs.
No, we used to hear the frogs. I don't hear the frogs either.
So there's a really incredible parallel between what's going on with the amphibians and what's going on with the white bark pine.
Like the white bark pine forests high in the mountains, habitats for amphibians here in the valleys are being degraded by climate change.
Yellowstone shows us that it's possible to protect animals, even those that get pushed virtually to the brink of extinction. We don't want lions and bears and tigers to go the way of the dinosaur. Be gone forever, just something that we'd see in a museum. I have no idea what they look like, what they look like.
Yellowstone is a special place. It's a success story in many ways, but it's not immune to global threats. Climate change, invasive species, population growth, all of these can chip away at the diversity here. Our work is not done.
All right. So I want you guys to take 1 minute with a partner next to you and discuss these two questions. How do organisms respond to environmental change? And does that change always involve genetic differences that could be acted on by natural selection? So take 1 minute, talk with somebody next to you, and then I'll ask some people to share.
I think that, or how do we, okay, we know how to do that. Does that change? This is like the actual a little bit because it's genetic.
All right. Let's see. Max, would you answer one of the questions for us? So it says, how do organisms respond to environmental change? Okay, perfect. All right, who else wants to share? Let's see, let's have Malcolm. The second one. So that's a good response. Anyone want to help out? Hannah?
It can be like genetic, but it can also be like behavioral, like traits that change too.
Yeah, perfect. So you got half of it. Hannah, thank you for filling in the other half. So when we look at it, it doesn't always have to be genetic differences. In this video, we looked at an example of the beetles, right? Did the beetles genetically change? No. What happened to the beetles? Yeah, they lived longer because of global warming or climate change. The temperature at Yellowstone got warmer, which allowed the beetles to move up the mountain. So they did not have a genetic change in their in the species or in the population. It simply got warmer, which was not killing off the beetles anymore. So animals will respond to those environmental changes as it benefits them. Is it always a benefit? No, sometimes it can be pretty bad for them, right? Yeah, James.
I also want to add that I think it's always an adaptation, but not always like they say, because like not always physical, it can be behavioral, because if you like the bears might change where they eat or something, but it can be little changes, but I think they'll always adapt.
Yeah, that's a perfect point that James made. So it doesn't always have to be some sort of physical adaptation or physical change when they're responding. The bears that they gave in the example, they changed behaviorally to learn how to hunt for food elsewhere by digging up those burrows or those mittens that they call them from the squirrels to find the seeds. So, all right, we're gonna watch this video, but before you do that, I need everyone to open up Canvas and pull up handout number 1.
See in this picture.
Yeah. You can just move over to the last entrance if you want. There's plugs over there, or it might be able to reach that plug. Let's see if we that before. All right, we're pulling up handout number 1. The handout's not doing origami. You need a charger. Okay, yeah, you can move wherever you need to.
isolated solid.
That might be a little
Yesterday, not over. All right, most people should have it pulled up by now. Okay, so for handout one, question number one, we are gonna watch this video. It's just a short 3-minute video. And I want you to take notes on the key concepts from the video. So key concepts could mean, what do you think the important messages that they're trying to get across? For you, a key concept might be, I don't understand that, and you want to write it down so you can study it further or ask questions about it. So just any key concepts that you find, I want you to write down for question number one on handout one while we watch this. Okay?
The folks you see in this picture are two NASA astronauts who also happen to be identical twins. On the left here, this is Mark Kelly. You can see his name on his patch right over there. And then this is Scott Kelly. And the reason why we want to look at these two astronauts in particular is to think about genotype and phenotype that we have been introduced to in other videos. So just as a bit of a review, when people talk about genotype, they're talking about the actual genetic information encoded in an organism's genes. So if you go inside a cell, we have chromosomes, and then on those chromosomes, they're long, each chromosome is a long stretch of DNA, and then sections of that long stretch of DNA will code for various things, often usually various proteins. But there's a difference between what information is in one's genes versus what actually gets expressed. The observable characteristics, that is phenotype. And two people with the same genotype, they might have a very similar phenotype, but they won't necessarily have an identical phenotype. Because above and beyond the genes affecting phenotype, you also have the environment affecting someone's phenotype. So as you can see here, Mark and Scott Kelly, they're identical twins. They have the same genotype. But if you just look at their facial characteristics, you can see that you can tell the difference between the two. And it's not just the fact that Mark has a mustache and that Scott doesn't. We could draw out a mustache, you would still see that they look different. And that's because their bodies developed in different ways based on the environment that they happen to be in. And this idea that the same genotype could result in variations of phenotype, this is known as phenotype plasticity. Phenotype plasticity. And maybe in one of the most extreme experiments ever conducted on phenotype plasticity, NASA was intrigued to see, well, what would happen to the gene expression if Scott Kelly spent an extensive period of time in space while his twin brother didn't. So they looked at how their bodies expressed certain characteristics before Scott spent an extended period of time in space. And then after he spent that time in space, they studied his body. And they saw that there was differences in the mitochondria, differences in which genes were expressed. In fact, there was a 7% difference in the gene expression after the extended time in space for Scott. So that's an example of that space environment changing Scott's phenotype. And the NASA scientists theorized that there was a low oxygen environment, there was a lot of carbon dioxide in that environment, there were stressors from space travel that would have affected how the genotype, which is identical to his brother Mark's genotype, how it might have been expressed, resulting in the phenotype plasticity above and beyond what other changes in phenotype between Scott and Mark accumulated over the course of their lives, despite having the same genetic information.
All right, take a couple seconds, finish writing out your final thoughts. All right, who wants to share what some key concepts were from that video? Yeah.
That genes you express can be heavily impacted on the environment.
Environment has a lot to do with the genes being expressed. Anybody else? No. see. Already called on Isaac. So how about Claire Hazen?
Like, what do you like look like? And, like, what you travel by, and like, you reported like in before space and after space.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Do we recognize the words genotype and phenotype from previous unit? What's genotype? Yeah, our genetic code. And what's phenotype? Yeah, what's expressed outwardly based on that. So when we look at this, they talk about the phenotype and how it changed by 7% for the one twin who was up in space. So that doesn't mean his genetics were changed. He didn't go through any genetic mutations, but his phenotype changed as to what traits he was actually expressing, which can make them look different, give them different advantageous traits in a sense. So we are going to, let's see, move on now with handout 1. This goes along with what I talked about at the beginning of class. I want us to learn from the evidence. So when you read this article and answer the questions, I don't want you to look at it as, oh, I just need to finish this because it's an assignment. I want you to actually learn from it. If you're confused on something, ask questions. I'll be walking around. Discuss with people next to you about the questions and really try and learn about what the questions are asking rather than just putting down an answer to finish it off. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you guys about 15 minutes to work on this. I'll kind of watch, and if we finish sooner, then we can move on. But I'll give you about 15 minutes to work on it. You can work with a partner if you want to discuss with them, and then I'll bring us back to move on to the next part after that. So the 15 minutes are yours. There's a video at the bottom of the article. You know, if you can watch the video. We'll do that together. Question 3.
Does that make sense?
Slow song. Got about 3 more minutes to finish up this part. We'll come back together and have some people share. All right, looks like most people are done with that. So I want to go over 2 of the questions that were on that portion of the handout. The first is, what is phenotypic plasticity? I've asked Rachel to go ahead and help us out with that one.
Okay, phenotypic plasticity is a change to any organism that wasn't caused by a change in its genes. It can be molded or influenced by its environment.
Perfect. So when we talk about phenotypic plasticity, we're talking about what happened with the astronaut, right? His outward phenotype, his traits that were expressed changed because of the environment he was in. And that's what happens with other organisms based on their environment. Your outward traits are changing, or your behaviors could change because of what's going on around you. And do I have anyone who wants to share why are evolutionary adaptations never intentional? Yeah, James?
Evolutionary adaptations adaptations are never intentional because you have, like your body has a intent to survive almost all the time. So you can't just say, I want to change how my body is, but you can change that when it's necessary to survive.
Perfect. That's one part to it. Anybody else want to share? Yeah.
Also,
Yeah, exactly. And that's the second part. So the organism can't decide to change itself. It doesn't just say one day and wake up in the morning and say, I want to change the color of my hair, or I want to be able to do this. And it cannot control the environment around it. We don't know when natural disasters are going to happen. We can't control climate change and the warming of the temperatures. So that would be why evolutionary adaptations are never intentional. We don't know what's going to happen or what's going on. So we are going to move on now to question 3 on handout 1. Question 3, you're not really filling out questions. This is more of that key concept idea, but rather than putting the key concepts down, I want you to write down new additions to your learning. So what is something that you learned from this video that we did not learn previously from the other videos or from the article? Or maybe you have an answer to a question that you asked earlier that you found out from this video. So it's about 10 minutes long. It's packed with a lot of good information. This is a biologist at a university. It's not like the most exciting video in the world, but it does have a lot of good information to it. So I want you to make sure that you pay a lot of information to what he's saying. And this again is on question 3, handout 1.
From the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center and Understanding Evolution, this is the Evolution in the News story for May 2009. I'm Kristen Jenkins. As the climate warms, plants and animals are faced with rapidly changing environmental conditions. Species survival depends on the ability to adjust to these changes. Such changes can be in behavior, such as a plant flowering later or birds laying eggs earlier. Morphology, say a larger or smaller adult body size. Or physiology, for example, the ability to tolerate higher temperatures. One way for this to happen is through the evolutionary process of adaptation. This process requires advantageous mutations to arise and several generations for the trait to become common in the population. Another way for this to happen is through phenotypic plasticity. Phenotypic plasticity allows individuals to adjust their behavior, morphology, or physiology based on environmental cues. Some species have evolved more phenotypic plasticity than others. And these are the species that may have a better chance of surviving in a rapidly changing environment. In order to make good decisions about regulating greenhouse emissions or for conservation planning, we need to understand how organisms deal with changing environments, whether they will respond through adaptation or through phenotypic plasticity. Dr. George Gilchrist, a professor of biology at the College of William and Mary, is an evolutionary biologist investigating this question.
My name is George Gilchrist. I'm a evolutionary biologist at the College of William and Mary. I study how organisms adapt to a changing climate. I'm interested in all sorts of timescales, from daily change to seasonal change to the kinds of global climate changes that we are seeing right now throughout the world.
What is the difference between an adaptation and acclimating? What does phenotypic plasticity have to do with this?
So let's use an example from my research to talk about this difference between an acclimatory or plastic response and evolved or adaptive response. It's been known for a long time that for most organisms, but particularly for insects, if you grow up larvae in a cold environment, as adults, they'll reach a larger body size than if you grow up the larvae in a warm environment. These could be genetically identical populations. It's strictly a phenotypic response, and it's a plastic response. Temperature during development affects adult body size when the adults eat clothes. We can see a similar parallel response as an evolved adaptation across latitudinal gradients. Animals from low latitude warm populations, say Southern California, are smaller in body size than animals in the same species from high latitude populations, say British Columbia. This difference, though, is not just a plastic response. This is a genetic difference. If we take those animals into what we call a common garden experiment, as we bring them into the lab and we rear them for multiple generations under identical conditions, the ones from the high latitude population are always larger than the ones from the low latitude population. That shows it's a genetic difference, not a plastic difference.
What other factors influence the impact of climate change on species?
One of the things that you have to appreciate about climate change is that there's a geographical component, both to the predicted changes from the climate modelers and to the geographic structure of natural populations. Most of us who've read the news about this probably aware that the predictions are, and in fact, the data show that high latitudes, the Arctic and polar areas, will undergo much more dramatic warming and are undergoing much more dramatic warming than other parts of the globe. These, of course, are home to a unique group of animals, things like penguins, polar bears, ice fish, a wide variety of organisms that can't live in warmer climates, that are adapted genetically to these cold habitats. You probably see in the news that there's concern about polar bears shrinking habitat. Polar bears hunt on ice for seals, and as sea ice disappears, essentially their hunting grounds are melting away. And it's not clear from the ecological standpoint what polar bears are going to do. One might hope that they can acclimate to this new situation. This is using phenotypic plasticity to somehow switch their diet or their hunting style, either to hunt seals in a very different way or to use some other resource that doesn't require sea ice in order to access it. That would be an acclimatory change or a phenotypically plastic change in the way polar bears behave that would allow their populations to persist. What we don't know right now is whether they have that ability or not. Right now, polar bears generally hunt seals on sea ice. We don't know if they have any plasticity in that behavior.
How do species respond to climate change?
What we know from history, from the fossil record, is that in the past, when the climates change, populations of organisms, be they plants or animals, essentially get up and move. In a warming world, populations move towards the poles and towards higher altitudes. In a cooling world, they move from the poles towards the equator and down from the mountaintops to lower altitude. In our world, a warming world, there's important considerations about the options that are available to certain groups of organisms. For example, in a warming world, a polar organism really doesn't have a cooler climate that it can move to. An organism that lives, say, at the mid-latitudes, something like in the Nebraska or South Dakota can move north if it needs colder habitat as Nebraska and South Dakota begin to warm. An organism in the Bering Strait or at the Arctic Circle really has nowhere to go. There's no colder climate available. So those organisms have to adapt genetically or acclimate phenotypically to those changing conditions.
If organisms can get up and move to better climates, why is climate change a problem for anything except organisms already living at the coldest extremes?
Another example, much more subtle, are the tropics. Immediately north or south of the tropics, it gets hotter, not cooler. The tropics are warm, but not that warm. Temperatures tend to average in the mid-20s most of the time in the tropics, and there's very little temperature variation seasonally. Tropical organisms don't have a cooler habitat they can move to, even though the tropics aren't expected to warm very much. There's nowhere to go, because if you go north or south, you're immediately going to encounter more desert-like and hot conditions. Because of the constancy of conditions in the tropics, organisms have evolved relatively narrow ranges of thermal tolerance. They never see extremely hot weather or extremely cold weather. Therefore, there's been no natural selection for organisms to be able to persist under those conditions. Likewise, because organisms don't see a lot of variation within their lifetimes, there's very little selection for acclimation ability. They have very low phenotypic plasticity. So small changes in the tropics are actually expected to have much more dramatic rate effects on rates of extinction than are changes at higher latitudes, simply because tropical organisms are so specialized for the conditions that they see.
How did you become interested?
All right. I know that was the most thrilling video of your whole life, and you want us to watch it 5 more times.
Yes.
There's just a lot of good information in that video. He explained a lot, gave a lot of good examples. So hopefully you were able to write down some things on question number 3 that added to your understanding about the environment and how it affects evolution, as well as things like phenotypic plasticity. That's a big term we're using today. For the next part, I want you guys to, you should be done with handout 1 now, so you can turn that in through Canvas. For handout 2, that's in Canvas. There's an article in there that I want you to read with 7 questions, I believe. And this is, again, the same thing, really focus on the evidence that they're giving you to understand it, because that is your learning process for this unit. You'll have till the end of class to work on handout 2. If you don't finish it today, you'll have some time tomorrow, since we're meeting tomorrow. And I will be walking around to answer questions so I can help you. Last class, there's a bit of confusing concepts to some people, so don't be afraid to ask if you have questions. But yeah, the rest of the time is yours to work on handout number 2. And you can move around, you can work with people, do whatever you need to. I know it's been kind of a quiet class today, so the rest of the time is yours.
School for a girl. Well, you just. Hammy. Shake. We should probably kind of skip it. I mean, ooh, sorry.
I just went back.
You're late. We're
No, what?
yeah, Mark out there. They can as long as you're there. I will tell you.
No,
I was watching Marty.
Ever watch Trolls?
No, I did not. See Marty. I missed a lot. You want to see my attendance? I was sick. I'm not gonna come. I'm not coming tomorrow. Oh, I'm gonna see you. Yeah, and I'm not coming to school tomorrow.
You're probably not.
Are you going to St. George? Yeah, you're not even gonna come.
Yeah, 2 games on Saturday.
Are you coming?
It's, I remember. Oh, when.
She is. It's scary. I have not heard that before. Who? Wait, who?
If it pops up, I think there's some on this.
You
playlist.
would though. Yeah, we're just like I would have been like, go to the family. Is he rich?
You're not. Okay.
I'm not great at spelling, James.
Oh, no, nothing's working. Is it Emma? He needs to wear heels.
Not with Claire.
Too good. I was like, I can see him wearing like. Why is nothing working?
Wait, what? No.
You guys. The phone, honey.
Yeah.
I'm taking it on Wednesday. I talked to Cassandra.
Wait. What have you guys been doing this
I've been so fun. I was just sitting there and I was like, didn't know what to
Yeah. She didn't care. She just wanted to.
It used to be $1.
Pretend like she's. Wait, look how this is. Wait, 5 and it's here.
I actually don't know when sorry. I was great.
Okay, sounds good, represent.
I wanted to say whatever. Yeah. It's like the evolutionary. I said specific practices around that's what I thought. Coach taught me for the 3 seconds, 3 whole seconds. I stopped. And then Coach grabbed me. And I was like, what? I don't know. This is I don't know why or how you like.
So I forgot on number 4, there's a typo. It shouldn't say clues that respond to seasonality. It should say cues that respond to seasonality. So what cues do the animals look like?
Oh. What? Oh. What? We've never
Mr. Goldman. I wasn't here. Tuesday.
It was that. Okay, did you sign up to do the for one we're taking off?
No, because I didn't take the. No, I forgot.
So you have to do both of them. You probably won't split it. Because when we take a class. So you have time today. coming up today, So. And you have. That works. Okay.
So if I sign up.
There's, yeah, on campus, there's a retake form. So just go into there, mark which one you're taking, you go for that. And then mark for today, and then I have some others coming in Wednesday, even though Wednesday's not listed. Go fill that out.
Well, basically, I have Chris. I was more just. She said that after her fancy party, that's like maybe. I went to freshman. Oh, great.
And I was like, oh, yeah. And I was like,
Which
yeah, so we're just saying. It's a good turnout.
So we wrap. Yeah. I don't think it's
If you're finished, turn it in, canvas, if not, you'll have to find tomorrow. You guys track me in 3, 2, 1.
Like dirty. I want to like hit someone.
Like,
But maybe since it's your last.
guys, okay, so what I was saying, if you finish, turn it in, if not, you'll have time tomorrow. Your warm-ups, make sure your names are on them, and as you leave class, you'll just leave them on the corner of the counter right here for me. And then we will see you guys tomorrow.